Hello class and welcome to MSE 608B. It's our week 8 video lecture, and this week it's going to be on people conflict. What I'd like to do is introduce a great book for you first. It's called Taking Charge by David Cohen. The book itself is a thin read, but it's got a lot of really good information in it, and it really looks at things from a couple different perspectives that are unique. One of them is towards the end of our presentation, some information you're going to get on how do we mediate or moderate a conflict, and then being able to identify exactly what a conflict is and the types of conflict that we run into. So let's go ahead and start this lecture, get it headed down the direction where we can really give you a good, clear sense of what is conflict. So conflict, the traditional definition for it, is a form of interaction among parties that differ in interests, perceptions, and preferences. Also, it can be a serious disagreement or argument, typically a protracted one. Now, there are three different types of conflict that we're going to talk about in this lecture. And I know there's different models out there that show either 4 different types of conflict, potentially only 2. I think it's really relevant and important to cover at least these 3. These 3 are the ones that within a high-tech organization, almost all leaders and managers have to deal with. The first one is task conflict, and that's conflict that occurs when 2 parties are unable to move forward on a task due to differing needs, behaviors, or attitudes. The next one is called relationship conflict, and that's conflict resulting from either personality clashes or negative emotional interactions between 2 or more people. The third one is going to be called process conflict, and that's conflict that refers to a disagreement over the methods or procedures a group should take in order to complete its tasks. It occurs when strategies, policies, and procedures clash when you have that interaction between them. So remember, we're going to really focus in on only these 3 types of conflict, and we're going to look at things from a negative conflict perspective until we get to the end. At that point, I'll go ahead and address positive conflict and some of the positive outcomes that you can have from it. But typically speaking, conflict is not a good thing, and it's something that we're going to have to work on trying to remove. So task conflict, when we talk about task conflict, it involves work content, the tasks you're doing, the goals, the milestones that you're trying to accomplish. It's related positively to creativity and innovation, but not related to routine task performance, and it is related to increased performance only when all members share the same goals and have a high level of trust. So that's task conflict. Now, when we talk about relationship conflict, it arises out of personal differences between people, such as differing goals, values, or personalities, mental models, paradigms, anything like that. It focuses on interpersonal relationships, those relationships between people. And then the third one, when we talked about it, process conflict, it arises over responsibilities and how work should be completed. It relates to how the work gets done. So those are the 3 areas. Now, I know this slide has got a lot of pieces on it, but I want to talk about the stages of conflict and the process of what you go through. There's a series of, I'll call it steps, and this actually lays out 5 different, I'll call it steps when we want to examine a conflict. So the first thing you would do is examine the conflict, state the problem, the issues, facts, or emotions, to really get a good clarity of what that is. Step 2, you need to acknowledge and appreciate other people's feelings, not just your own. The third one is decide solutions or the best solution for everyone, looking at it from a consensus standpoint. Step 4 is going to be gain agreement, and then to get moving, to continue moving forward. And then step 5 is to evaluate the conversation, a reflection mode where you'll go back and look and say, did we cover what we needed to cover? Very similar to the Deming Plan, Do, Study, Act model, this is a reflective model that starts with understanding the awareness, working through the steps. Now, there are 3 stages to conflict, and this is one of the key things. You may have something that's at stage 1, and stage 1 conflicts are small and little emotional consequence. They're things that can usually be brushed off It's not something that interferes with the organization or the people. It's not something that you really, really need to, I'll call it, have an interactive, separation of people or something like that. It could just be that two people disagree over something like who was, the Dodgers are better than the Mets. The Mets are better than the Dodgers. Hey, we agree to disagree. Not a problem. Stage 2, the conflict that produces stronger feelings and discomfort that tend to distract us from what we would normally be doing. That is where we start having interactions with either people or the work being done or things like that. This is where we want to try to identify a conflict, and we need to interact in a way to prevent that or to eliminate it if possible. And then when you get to stage 3 conflicts that cause us to lose control. People can completely lose control. Emotionally, it can happen. So let's take a look at the causes of conflict, just what some of those are. There are structural factors. There's communication, too little or too much of it. Cognitive factors, differing expectations, perceptions of what different people think, and then individual characteristics. You may not like somebody's personality, their values, their differences, their goals. And then history is past performance or previous interactions, what someone has done in the past. All of these can cause some level of conflict. And those effects of conflict are broken down into 3 different areas. One is they basically impact individuals. That would be you, that would be the people that you're leading or managing within your high-tech organization. Those are specific individuals. It also affects the behavior of the people, the behavior of the organization, and it impacts interpersonal relationships, how people interact with each other based on their relationships. So the effects of behaviors are reduced motivation and productivity. So you can see that this list here directly impacts the work performance that's happening in an organization. So we want to make sure that we understand this. You can have reduced motivation and productivity. You can have avoidance of the other party. Somebody would get to the point where they would say, I just don't want to be around that person. And they walk into a conference room and somebody gets up and walks out and says, I don't want to deal with that. I don't even want to be around the person. There can be threats, aggression. You can have people that will quit your organization so that they don't have to be involved in conflicts with other people. You may start to notice absenteeism where people do not come in. There are biases or perceptions, mental models, and like I said, paradigms where people have perceptions of other people that may not be accurate. You have stereotype thinking, and you have an increased commitment to one's position, to where someone becomes so stagnated and so entrenched in their position that they're not willing to listen to other people. Now, what are the sources of conflict? And there's a variety of them. You can see on the map that we've got here, you've got incompatible goals and time horizons. So if I give you an unrealistic objective that you have to do, that is going to cause you, I'll call it, conflict of some sort. Overlapping authority, where I have 2 people telling someone to do the same thing or do something different, and nobody knows who's in control. You have task interdependencies. You have incompatible evaluation or reward systems where people feel like someone else is getting rewarded and I'm not. That can cause conflict. Scarce resources, where you're spreading your people too thin and there are few resources to get the work done. That can cause it. And status inconsistencies, where someone has a different level of status. All of these are sources of conflict. And the effects of those on behavior: reduced motivation and productivity, avoidance of the other party, threats, aggression, once again, quitting, absenteeism. All of those things we talked about prior fall in there also. In addition to that, you have effects of interpersonal relationships, where you can have distrust, where people will not trust each other. They have misunderstandings that happen when you would think that there should be a clear understanding of what's going on. An inability to see someone else's perspective, questioning the intentions of other people, changed attitudes towards others, changed amounts of power, changed quality of communication, and changed amount of communication. All of these are effects of interpersonal relationships based upon conflict. Now, when we look at conflict, there's 4 different potential outcomes: win-win, win-lose, lose-lose, lose-win. Well, there's only one positive one here. It really is. Even though I know that we talk about through compromise, we can move around through these different, quadrants, but ultimately we're trying to look for a win-win scenario. A lose-lose scenario would be one where I'm going to lose, so I'm going to take you down also. A win-lose is I win, you lose. That's not good either. All of these scenarios, with the exception of win-win, will cause conflicts. And what you're needing to do, or what you will need to do, is find some way to create compromise. And compromise is tough. It's not something that's easy. But when we start looking at responses to conflict, there are a couple different ways we can do that. And one is on the scale at the bottom from a cooperativeness, and then the scale on the side for assertiveness, running from low to high in both directions. You'll see the difference between avoiding and accommodating. So if we can move all the way to the high side here, and we look at avoiding all the way up to competing, that if we can get to the competing side and the collaborating side and the accommodating side through compromise, we are then in a position where we can help to try to resolve a lot of conflicts. Now, there are different process steps to going through a conflict, and this is just one generic model. But the event occurs. That's over on the one side of what looks like a football broken into different pieces. Once that event occurs, you need to create a space, a negotiating space, where you can actually have a negotiating process or look at some sort of reconciliation of the relationship. How can we do that? And this may take a facilitator or a mediator, but this is typically the process that you would go through. Then the next step, which is the green step, is going to be facilitating exploration and understanding. This is where we have to ask people, what exactly is it that has you upset? What exactly is the situation? We need to understand if it's complex, how to pull it apart. What are the interdependent pieces of it? If it's based on 3 people, what's that interconnectivity? If it's based on a process or a relationship or a task, we have to reframe that. We have to make sure we understand that. Then we have to understand the needs of all of the people in the group. What are their goals? Now we're going to move over to the blue, the dark blue side, and you're going to see that we need to generate a series of options, multiple options. What is it we could do to resolve this conflict? What are the pieces to it? What is it that's available to us that would work for not only me, but for you? Lay that out. We need to listen to what other people are talking about. And this is one of the key areas that a lot of people miss, is that we need to listen very clearly. People tend to tell you exactly what it is, but we tend not to hear it sometimes. So you need to clearly evaluate or collectively evaluate all of the options also. The next step is going to be moving over to the purple side. The purple side, we're going to discern and decide. This is the point where we, through agreement, would decide on a path forward. What is it we're going to do that makes things different? Okay? And you can see the loop that we've got between the green and the blue. This may take iterations sometimes to get over to that purple side. But ultimately, we look at the yellow piece on the back end being healing, and healing being that we're actually trying to find a way through resolution to get beyond that conflict. And that's what we would refer to as healing. It isn't meant to be the medical term, it's meant to be more of the psychological term. Now, I've got 2 different graphs that I want to show you here. One is kind of the degree of, and it's right below my image. So if you take a look at that particular I'll call it series of bell charts, or that bell chart, you can see that task performance based upon the degrees of conflict and what happens from a relationship conflict, from a process conflict, task conflict. So that bang, that bounce up there is what happens when we have task conflict. When we're trying to do something, you can see that the performance of your organization is going to be impacted by this. Let's also take a look at the decision-making process that I've got on the side. Now, this decision-making process can be used in a lot of different ways. But when you are sitting with a group of people and you're trying to determine what is it we should do to resolve a conflict, that decision-making process allows you to come out and identify the problem, look at it from your perspective, design or define possible alternatives, analyze proposed solutions, choose the best solution, look at it from the process of the implementation and control of the implementation of that decision. What decision do we need to make to resolve this conflict? Follow these two different graphs if you need to. It's a great way to illustrate conflict for other people. Now, there's 6 steps for conflict resolution, and they are typically known in almost all processes. So these are for conflict resolution. How do we get rid of conflict? You have to name the conflict. First, you have to identify it. Then you have to assess your role. What is my role? What is your role? What are the roles? Assess those roles. Then you would brainstorm options that are available for you. What is it we could do? Then you have to communicate your findings. So you have to let these people know, the people that are involved in the conflict, what exactly did we find out? And then you have to engage in problem solving. That problem solving map that I showed you previously would be a great one to use for this. And then you need to monitor those results. So you need to just kind of come back and double check, make sure that the conflict has either resolved itself through this process, or that if we need to come back with another interaction, that we do that. Now, in addition to that, there's another thing I want to talk to you about, and that is with certain types of conflict. And I'm not talking about physical altercations, because that's going to take a different type of twist. I'm talking about the steps in conflict mediation. And you may need to hire a mediator. You may need to train people in your organization with mediation techniques. Okay, because there are people that do nothing but that professionally. So make sure you talk to them if you've got them in your organization. You typically might find them over in the HR side of the house. But if you're looking for steps, the steps you would go to in conflict from a mediation standpoint, you need to establish a contract. You need to sit down with the people and say, we are going to find a way to resolve this conflict. This is an official conflict. It needs some level of mediation. Then you would define the problem. Once you've defined the problem, then you're going to look at the people that are involved in it and you're saying, what concessions would you be willing to give up? What is it that you could let go of that would allow us to release this conflict from happening? Once you have that, you would then brainstorm solutions to it. Once you're done with that, you would then go back and evaluate those solutions. Take a peek. Which ones are the ones that from a consensus standpoint we could all agree on? What's the best solution? And then you choose a solution. Once you've made that choice of the solution, all of those people that were established in the contract, all of the stakeholders that are tied together in this process now need to get agreement. And one of the big things you need to do is the list of things that are underneath the picture of my image over here. And the first one is listen. You need to make sure, as I described earlier, that you are listening. You've got to listen. There's a lot of information that we just do not hear. We tune it out. The other thing is you need to respect each other and you need to avoid arguing or putting each other down. Work together to find a solution to a conflict and keep what transpires confidential. You don't need to go broadcasting all of this to everyone in the organization. You want to find a way to resolve this as easily and quietly as possible. That doesn't mean we hide it. That means we want to resolve it as quickly as possible. Now, let's look at positive conflict. So we've talked about negative conflict up to this point. Let's talk about the benefits, the potential benefits of conflict from a positive perspective. And these 5 areas, improved problem solving, spontaneity in communication, enhanced morale, and cohesion, those are all things that kind of take your organization in a different direction than it was. The stimulation of creativity and the potential benefits of conflict. All of these are tied together. Now there's one person that I have always heard of and have had described as a master of this, and that was Steve Jobs. And he used to love to create conflict and chaos in some of his environments so that he thought it would increase or stimulate creativity. It would lead to the ability to really be able to, come up with new, unique ideas. Now that's a very, very tough thing to balance, because negative conflict is so bad many times that it prevents us from being able to look at things from a positive conflict perspective. So if we talk about positive conflict, what we're looking at is the interaction that could lead to new ideas in a positive way, something that stimulates creativity in a positive way, something that might motivate change in a positive way, something that promotes organizational vitality, something that helps individuals and groups establish their identities, something that serves as a safety valve to indicate that there's problems either going to happen or will be happening in the future, and then finally something that leads to better communication and understanding on both sides. So if there is a positive conflict that can be used to stimulate those, I would consider it to be something that would be valuable for us. Other than that, you need to approach conflict and understand that it has tremendous consequences associated with the damage it can do, not only to people from a task and relationship perspective, but to an organization from a process perspective. So let's just take those three separate pieces. Relationship conflict, once again, was when you've got two people that butt heads, they don't get along, okay? Tasks, when I put two competing tasks together, that prevents somebody from feeling like they can complete a task. You need to make sure that you look at that. And then finally, processes. If our process is set up to where it doesn't allow someone to do what they need to do, we need to revise those processes. So that's the lecture for this week on conflict. But what I do is I have 6 questions for you. And these 6 questions, remember, I'm always looking for a yes or no to each one of these. But as we've said in the past, sometimes you may look at it and say, these are situational, and the answer might be, it depends, or it might be, I don't know. So always remember that. So question 1, if you don't get along with someone at work, does that mean that you have a conflict with them? You have to tell me. Question 2, should I cause conflict to get people to do something differently? Question 3, is conflict a good or a bad thing? Question 4, when someone comes to me and tells me they need help with a conflict, who should I send them to? Question 5, if someone starts yelling at me, is this considered a conflict? And finally, question 6, should we ignore conflicts if they do not affect us or impact us? Those are the 6 questions. Once again, this has been the lecture on conflict. Have a great week. Goodbye.